shut down. These flights will fly to Canada.
They're not taking flights either, would you?
Are you screening passengers?
Remove them from another area.
90s. Some of the deserts will still top at 100 degrees or so. 80s across the southern tier of the nation and 90s over South Texas. Across the northern tier of the nation, cooler weather.
We'll be meeting with the FAA. We'll be conducting analysis of our intelligence that we have. Determination later on this afternoon.
Only on cartoon.
A touch of surprise.
Thank you. Thank you, Don, very much. You know, somebody said, looking at the Pentagon this morning, that it reminded them of World War II. Clearly a person too young to remember World War II. But as you look at these scenes, you can feel absolutely clear that you're looking at the results of the United States at war with angry and vicious people who will do in the future, as they have in the past, whatever they can to get at the United States, this huge...
Directly across on the island. But there were precious few people waiting there in line to be ferried away. They may have been evacuated north, or they may have been evacuated in the other direction from the World Trade Center. But by the time I got down to the tip of the island, or actually not quite to the tip, it's short of that, there were not that many people waiting to be evacuated, and I hopped on a private boat, came over here to the PATH train station on the New Jersey side. All the phones are down, but I got a line through to you all.
John, and we cannot tell you how thrilled we are. You were one person we were very concerned about. Can you give us a sense of how many people were on this same route? I mean, how many evacuation routes are there, and are they being, jammed at this point?
I'm not sure how to put this in words, but you can only imagine. It is chaos. I got to also say, without trying to sound, dramatic about this, that the professionalism of the EMS and the firefighters was there throughout. They're basically in an environment where two enormous buildings have crashed to the ground. Many of their colleagues were caught in this in some way. Just before I left the building, I reported to Mark Haynes there were people leaping out of the the
John,
building.
we have to interrupt you because we are going to go now live to a news conference which concerns the situation.
I have no information on the United flight right now.
With the airlines. I believe this is a United Airlines spokesperson at Logan Airport.
Again, I'm not familiar with the particular flight patterns they may have filed.
Was it a non-stop flight to Los Angeles?
I believe it was.
What time were the flights?
And they are both gone. Now, just to deal with the possibility of the missing United Airlines flight.
We lost communications with Molly Falconer. You can understand why. It is a chaotic day, and many of this city's and this nation's communications
Nosotros tenemos aquí con nosotros en los estudios al profesor Eduardo Gamarra, que es profesor de Ciencias Políticas de la Universidad Internacional de la Florida, también director del Centro Panamericano y del Caribe, alguien que pues conoce muy bien este tipo de temas. ¿Esto huele a Bin Laden? Claro, toda esa especulación por ahora, pero ¿huele a Bin Laden?
Sí, yo creo que ahora la especulación más fuerte se remonta a una declaración hace 3 semanas de Bin Laden, que dijo en un momento que en este contexto de apoyo norteamericano a Israel, que Estados Unidos podría esperar una retaliación sin precedentes. Obviamente esto es sin precedentes, pero creo que es prematuro saltar a una conclusión de que si es Bin Laden o alguna otra.
¿Quién es Osama Bin Laden, profesor?
Bueno, Osama Bin Laden es un señor de Arabia Saudita que en el pasado ha sido conocido de manera espectacular también, en particular por la bomba que se puso a la embajada norteamericana en Kenia hace 2 años. Se supone que está en algún lado en Afganistán organizando este tipo de acciones terroristas en todo el mundo, no solo en el África y no solo en el Medio Oriente, pero también se supone que estuvo detrás del anterior ataque en los Estados Unidos, particularmente en la torre, en estas precisamente estas mismas torres, exacto. Sí.
¿Este es un grupo que tiene base religiosa fundamentalista?
Por supuesto, es un grupo fundamentalista, obviamente musulmán, vinculado también a fracciones de la Organización de Liberación Palestina, particularmente el movimiento Hezbollah, que actúa en el Medio Oriente.
Profesor,
Jorge,
muchos
perdona,
consideran...
déjame interrumpirte un momentito porque la aerolínea United acaba de informar que está muy preocupado por otro vuelo, el vuelo 175, un Boeing 767, que iba de Boston a Los Ángeles y que también está desaparecido.
Entonces, a ver, Marielena, y yo creo que esto es
varios.
importante. La aerolínea American Airlines ha hablado de 2 aviones perdidos, que no incluyen a los 3 que ya se estrellaron. United Airlines confirmó otro que se estrelló cerca de Pittsburgh y ahora uno más.
Un avión más de la aerolínea United, un 767 de Boston a Los Ángeles, vuelo 175 que en estos momentos está perdido, está desaparecido.
O sea que tenemos 3 aviones perdidos.
Así es.
Profesor, ¿quién puede infiltrar los sistemas de seguridad que existen en los principales aeropuertos de los Estados Unidos? De esta forma, hay 3 aviones que se han estrellado, 3 más que se encuentran perdidos. ¿Quién está detrás de esto? Debe ser con una inteligencia sofisticadísima.
Claro, por eso precisamente yo creo que es fácil llegar a la conclusión que esto es algo árabe y que no es algo, por ejemplo, latinoamericano o inclusive interno. Debemos, sin embargo...
O sea, no, ya que lo dice, o sea, no son... Por ejemplo, ayer el secretario de Estado, Colin Powell, declaró terroristas a los paramilitares de Colombia. O sea, no podemos esperar este tipo de actos de un grupo latinoamericano.
Yo creo que hay 2 motivos por el que no se puede esperar que sean latinoamericanos. Uno es el hecho de que son actos suicidas. Los únicos suicidas que conocemos son los grupos vinculados a los movimientos de la liberación palestina. Eso por una parte. Y segundo, el hecho de que cuando hubo el ataque en Oklahoma City, el terrorista, en ese caso un terrorista interno, se dio a la fuga. Es decir, el hecho de que estos son actos suicidas me lleva a pensar que tiene un componente religioso muy alto.
Le pedimos, por supuesto,
Sí,
profesor Gamarra, que se mantenga aquí con nosotros un ratito. Vamos a pasar directamente ahora a Nueva York. Ahí se encuentra nuestra corresponsal Blanca Rosa Vilches. Ella está precisamente en las Torres Gemelas, alrededor de las Torres Gemelas. Blanca Rosa, buenos días. ¿Qué es lo que estás viendo tú?
María Elena, buenos días. Me encuentro exactamente como a unas 3 cuadras de las Torres Gemelas. Nosotros llegamos como a los 10 minutos que se produjo todo y hemos podido ver exactamente lo que ocurrió. El ambiente es realmente caótico. Jamás creo que ningún neoyorquino ha visto la ciudad en este caos. Cuando se produjo la segunda explosión, vimos a decenas de personas, por supuesto incluidos los camarógrafos, nosotros los reporteros, corriendo literalmente para salvar nuestras vidas, porque el humo estaba exactamente detrás nuestro. Jamás creo que a nosotros nos ha pasado una cosa así escalofriante en la que tú corres para salvar tu vida, y los policías también, son decenas de personas, y creo que lo que más nos ha impresionado a todos los que hemos estado aquí es ver cómo estas personas, por salvar la vida, se han tirado, como ustedes han estado viendo en el video, se han tirado desde los edificios. La desesperación que deben haber sentido por estar con las llamas y por saber que de todas maneras iban a morir, que era una opción, morirte quemado o morirte por un suicidio. Y la cantidad de gente que estábamos totalmente anonadadas en la parte de abajo contemplando la muerte de estas decenas de personas que se arrojaban desde las Torres Gemelas antes de que se produjera lo que ustedes ya han visto, que es la segunda explosión. En estos momentos el caos no solamente es por lo que ha ocurrido, sino por lo que tal vez podría ocurrir. Por ejemplo, hace unos 5 minutos dijeron que en una de las escuelas que está aledaña a las Torres Gemelas había explosivos. Como podrás entender, otra vez la policía nos ha enviado y nos ha evacuado. Ahora estamos, como dije al principio, a unas 3, 4 cuadras de distancia, y poco a poco nos están pidiendo que salgamos, porque tampoco es 100% seguro, por todo lo que ha ocurrido, si estamos en un sitio que deberíamos estar o no. Como repito, esta es posibilidad de que haya explosivos en esta escuela, es algo que la propia policía lo ha dicho, y que nosotros estamos aquí a la expectativa como el mundo entero.
Blanca Rosa, precisamente quería preguntarte eso. Hemos visto cómo se han derrumbado virtualmente las 2 Torres Gemelas, pero ¿hay algún otro edificio alrededor de las Torres Gemelas que también haya sido afectado, ya sea por las explosiones, por el fuego o por el derrumbamiento de estos edificios?
exactamente, Mariela, no sé si ustedes han tenido la oportunidad de ver en los videos, exactamente al cruzar la calle de las Torres Gemelas hay un edificio que sí fue afectado por las llamas, pero no sabemos si es producto de este mismo problema. Como comprenderás, todo es caótico. Nosotros hemos conversado con testigos, uno de ellos que vio exactamente lo que pasó, un trabajador que estaba en el piso 35 del edificio aledaño. Como tú sabes, esta es una zona en donde se encuentran los mercados financieros, donde se encuentra Wall Street, y son edificios muy altos, y son edificios donde tú puedes contemplar hasta cierto punto con cierta visibilidad lo que ocurre alrededor tuyo. Para responder nuevamente tu pregunta, sí hay el edificio exactamente el que se encuentra al cruzar la calle de las Torres Gemelas, que aparentemente ha sido afectado y que hemos podido ver llamas desde la parte de afuera. Como te repito, la visibilidad que nosotros tenemos es de unas 3 cuadras más o menos, Mariana.
Una última pregunta antes de pasar a otra persona. ¿Hay informes contradictorios sobre la cantidad de personas que podría haber en las Torres Gemelas? ¿Se habla de 10.000 o se habla de 50.000? ¿Qué información sabes tú?
María Elena, oficialmente no tenemos una cifra. Sin embargo, déjame decirte, en las Torres Gemelas trabajan miles de personas, número uno. Número dos, siempre estas personas empiezan a trabajar a las 8 de la mañana, a diferencia de otras personas que por lo general el horario es de 9 a 5. En las Torres Gemelas y sobre todo en los edificios aledaños, trabajan a partir de las 8 de la mañana. O sea que ese edificio, si bien es cierto, no ha estado lleno a su capacidad total, sí ha habido personas. Se estima que pueden haber de 2.000 hasta 3.000 muertos.
Muchísimas gracias, Blanca Rosa. Blanca Rosa Miches en Nueva York, a 3 cuadras de las Torres Gemelas.
Ahora, dentro de las crisis, cuando hay situaciones caóticas como estas, surge lo mejor del periodismo. Y hay personas como Frank Ramírez, nuestro camarógrafo en Nueva York, que no nada más en estos momentos está haciendo funcionar la cámara, sino que al mismo tiempo está trabajando como reportero en uno de los lugares más cercanos. Frank, nos estás escuchando, ¿verdad?
Jorge, sí, buenos días, ¿cómo estás?
Buenos días, sabemos que estás detrás de la cámara y estás haciendo funcionar la cámara al mismo tiempo.
Déjame darte una explicación más o menos. Yo estoy aquí en el piso 12 de la oficina de Univision en Nueva York, que está en la calle 40, en la parte del medio de Nueva York.
¿Qué piso, Frank?
En el piso, nosotros estamos ahorita en el piso 12, ¿verdad? Entonces, anteriormente, desde esta oficina, se veían las Torres Gemelas que estaban exactamente ahí, ¿verdad? Ahorita lo que se ve, obviamente, es el humo y la cuestión que está saliendo de la parte del accidente. Siempre desde esta oficina podríamos ver las Torres Gemelas y el Empire State a la derecha, que está en la 34. Ahora ya no existe prácticamente.
Frank, háblanos sobre el lugar donde te encontrabas después del primer ataque y después del segundo ataque.
Bueno, yo me dirigía de Queens. Como bien saben, Manhattan es una isla y para entrar a la ciudad hay que pasar o un puente o un túnel. En ese momento todo estaba sellado, no se podía entrar, se veían las Torres Gemelas incendiándose con el humo, las llamas, y lo que pude hacer fue meterme detrás de un carro de policía y uno de bomberos, y así pude entrar a la ciudad y llegar a la oficina. La ciudad está totalmente paralizada. Si tú ves, todos estos carros están parados. Esta línea va de aquí hasta quién sabe dónde.
¿Qué calle es esta, Frank?
Esta es la tercera avenida a la altura de la 36.
Está bastante lejos de las Torres Gemelas.
Ahora, el Bajo Manhattan, Frank, está totalmente sellado, es decir, ¿ya no hay personas que hayan sido evacuadas? ¿O están todavía en el proceso de evacuación?
Todavía están en el proceso de evacuación. Lo que hemos visto aquí también a través de las estaciones locales, en lo que cayó la primera torre, mucha gente tuvo que correr por sus vidas y inmediatamente pasó con la torre sur y todo eso está siendo totalmente evacuado.
Antes de despedirnos, Frank, ¿nos pudieras hacer otro paneo de tu cámara para tener una idea de dónde estamos? Ahí es donde estaban las Torres Gemelas, donde está saliendo el humo. Y hacia el lado derecho,
están las Torres Gemelas.
Hacia el lado derecho, el Empire State.
Y el lado derecho, el Empire State. Y ahora el Empire State pasa a ser otra vez el edificio más alto, porque ya, obviamente, ya no tenemos las Torres Gemelas.
Y un día, en respecto a clima, perfecta visibilidad.
Bueno, si ves no sé si ustedes pueden apreciar, era un día bellísimo. O sea, el sol, la temperatura, era un día espectacular.
Y se sintió como un terremoto, supongo, la segunda explosión por lo menos, o la caída de las Torres Gemelas ahí.
Sí, fue un caos total, la gente llorando, las oficinas siendo evacuadas, es apoteósico.
Gracias Frank Ramírez, camarógrafo y ahora también en estos instantes reportero de Univision.
Sí, bueno, está con nosotros.
A tu orden.
Gracias Frank, está con nosotros, nos está acompañando Eduardo Gamarra, que es profesor de Ciencias Políticas de la Universidad Internacional de la Florida. Yo creo que muchos temen cuál es el siguiente paso, ¿no? ¿Cuáles pueden ser las consecuencias de todo esto?
Bueno,
¿podría desatarse una guerra? O sea, no queremos ser alarmistas, pero...
Este es un acto de guerra. El problema es identificar quiénes han sido los que han perpetrado semejante crimen. Y en ese sentido creo que es sumamente importante no precipitarse a llegar a una conclusión de quiénes fueron los que hicieron esto. Ahora, esta es una sociedad democrática, abierta, y lo que me temo es que precisamente porque es un acto tan atroz, que se desate un estado de seguridad, una alerta de seguridad que pueda precisamente identificar a individuos dentro del país, individuos inclusive que no sean culpables o que simplemente por parecer árabes sean objeto de cierta persecución. Ya lo hemos visto anteriormente en el caso de la Embajada de Irán, lo hemos visto durante Timothy McVeigh, etc.
Y que no todos los árabes son iguales, o sea, obviamente hay que hacer claras diferenciaciones entre algunos grupos de árabes y otros, ¿no?
Exacto, sí.
¿Cómo reaccionar? ¿Qué le aconsejaría usted al presidente de los Estados Unidos en este momento? ¿Qué hacer ante esta provocación de guerra?
Yo creo que Estados Unidos tiene suficiente inteligencia respecto a Bin Laden, respecto a otros grupos terroristas. Y creo que Estados Unidos también tiene por lo menos la tecnología para hacer golpes muy quirúrgicos, si vale el término. Sin embargo, ¿dónde se hace este tipo de reacción? Se hace lo que se hizo en Libia, por ejemplo, con el presidente Reagan, se hace lo que hizo el presidente Clinton con Bin Laden. ¿Cuál debe ser la reacción?
Profesor, aparentemente, y tenemos la información todavía no confirmada, pero estamos a punto de hacerlo, de otro avión de American Airlines que aparentemente se ha estrellado. United Airlines, esta es la información. United Airlines ha confirmado que otro avión, el Boeing 757, que iba de Newark, New Jersey, a San Francisco, se ha estrellado esta mañana cerca de Pittsburgh. Puede ser el mismo del que habíamos estado hablando hace unos momentos.
Me acaban de mencionar uno que chocó en Chicago. En Chicago, me acaban de informar. Por supuesto, no tenemos los detalles todavía. En cuanto tengamos esa información confirmada, se las vamos a entregar, pero me acaban de decir que la información que nos está llegando, y debemos de recalcar que nosotros tenemos varias fuentes de información que estamos utilizando, por supuesto, nuestro sistema de cables, de la prensa asociada, de Reuters, y también pues otros medios de comunicación como CNN. La información, por supuesto, si hay equivocaciones, si hay errores, ustedes deben de comprender que hay tanta información que se está manejando en este momento, que a veces es información que se repite, como en este caso, Jorge, este avión que acaban de confirmar que chocó en Pittsburgh, puede muy bien ser el mismo avión del que hablábamos hace aproximadamente una hora. Esta información, es que Chicago, no es que chocó en Chicago, es que la base de United Airlines está en Chicago. Entonces es la misma información.
Claro,
pero
ahora lo que podemos confirmar son hasta el momento 3 aviones que se han estrellado. Los 2 de American Airlines, confirmados por American Airlines en las Torres Gemelas, y ahora United Airlines está confirmando que efectivamente un Boeing 757 de Newark a San Francisco también se estrelló. Tenemos hasta el momento 3.
Tenemos un cuarto, Jorge, porque según esta información que nos está llegando, lo que dice la línea American Airlines es que un segundo avión de United ha chocado, que todavía no saben dónde ha chocado. Entonces, este viene siendo, Jorge, el cuarto avión que ha chocado. 2 de la aerolínea American, que son los 2 aviones que chocaron contra las Torres Gemelas, como tú bien dijiste, y otros 2 aviones que chocaron de United Airlines, uno de ellos en Pittsburgh y otro que todavía no se sabe dónde.
Nuevas imágenes de la gente en las Torres Gemelas haciendo lo que ustedes ven, la ropa haciendo señales de emergencia, de ayuda. Son personas que se encuentran, por supuesto, en los pisos superiores, desesperadas, y de acuerdo con la información que nos había dado Blanca Rosa Vilches hace unos momentos, algunas de estas personas, ante la opción de morir quemadas o morir saltando, decidieron morir saltando. Son imágenes y seguramente a lo largo del día seguiremos viendo estas imágenes terribles. Profesor Gamarra, más preguntas. Estados Unidos es, por supuesto, después de la desaparición de la Unión Soviética, la única superpotencia económica, militar, financiera. No hay otro país u otro ejército que pudiera enfrentarse. Entonces, a ustedes los académicos les gusta llamar estos conflictos asimétricos, ¿no?
Absolutamente.
Explíquenos esta palabra tan complicada en términos más sencillos. ¿Qué es lo que estamos viendo ahora?
Bueno, ese término quiere decir que, por ejemplo, un país tan pequeño como Palestina, ¿no?
O Afganistán.
O Afganistán no tiene la capacidad de enfrentarse militarmente o económicamente a Estados Unidos. Hay una disproporción enorme en términos de tamaño, en términos de capacidad militar, etcétera. En este contexto, lo que estos países han optado por hacer es precisamente recurrir al terrorismo. El terrorismo
O sea, es la guerra del futuro, o la forma de enfrentarse en el futuro.
Exacto. Es una guerra que es atroz porque en gran medida lo que se identifica es cualquier objetivo civil se convierte en un objetivo militar. Estos obviamente para nosotros son objetivos completamente civiles, sin embargo desde la óptica de esta perspectiva del terrorismo, desde esta perspectiva de cómo mejorar la asimetría, cualquier objetivo es un objetivo válido.
¿Pero qué quieren? O sea, por ejemplo, las miles de gentes, profesor, que nos están escuchando, dicen, ¿qué quieren estos terroristas? ¿O qué quieren lograr? ¿O qué pueden lograr matando a civiles? O sea, ¿qué objetivo se consigue con esto?
En gran medida debemos acordarnos que esto es un yihad, esto es una guerra sagrada, esto es una guerra que en realidad está en gran medida dedicada a influenciar lo que piensa Dios de ellos, no necesariamente a lo que piensa el oeste de ellos. Por eso es que nuestro concepto relativo de lo que es la moralidad, de lo que es, por ejemplo, atacar a un civil, no tiene validez en este contexto. Para ellos lo más importante es que esta es una guerra sagrada contra el gran villano, el gran demonio que es obviamente los Estados Unidos.
Y obviamente no valoran la vida de un ser humano.
Bueno, valoran la vida en una manera muy distinta a la nuestra. Ellos consideran, por ejemplo, que un sacrificio de la vida es un sacrificio por Dios.
Pero ¿por qué el demonio de los Estados Unidos? ¿Cuál es esta concepción? O sea, ¿por qué interpretan a Estados Unidos como el demonio o como el mal?
Bueno, hay un motivo histórico, obviamente el hecho de que Estados Unidos es un aliado acérrimo de Israel desde hace muchísimos años por una parte, y segundo, que Estados Unidos ha visto varios objetivos veamos simplemente el caso de la guerra del Golfo, ¿no? Un ataque desproporcionado sobre Bagdad, por ejemplo, donde murieron, de acuerdo a cálculos más conservadores, cerca de 200,000 personas.
Mira, vamos con Lourdes Melusá, Washington.
Sí, pero por favor manténgase con nosotros que tenemos otras preguntas que hacerlo. Por supuesto, es un análisis muy importante que hacer, el tratar de entender por qué ocurre esto y quién pudo haber sido responsable de esto. Vámonos directamente con nuestra corresponsal en Washington, Lourdes Melusá, que nos tiene nueva información. Lourdes, adelante.
Buenas, María Elena. Realmente Washington ahora realmente es una ciudad en estado de sitio, en estado de gran alerta. Ahora tenemos confirmación del Pentágono que en efecto fue un avión comercial el que directamente se estrelló contra el Pentágono y que una parte de este edificio se ha totalmente derrumbado. Como tú bien sabes, es el edificio más grande del mundo y es un símbolo realmente del poderío militar de Estados Unidos. Una humillante y terrible tragedia en el Pentágono. Estamos teniendo ya las reacciones también. Todos los edificios federales han sido evacuados, incluso el Capitolio, incluso nuestro edificio de oficinas, que está solamente a una cuadra, del Capitolio, ha sido evacuado. También solamente los medios estamos transmitiendo desde aquí. Pero, en fin, una ciudad sitiada. Todos los puentes que vienen de Virginia hacia la ciudad han sido cerrados también. El director de la CIA, tenemos un comentario de él, que es una de las agencias que será responsables por averiguar qué es lo que ha sucedido, cómo se ha perpetrado este ataque terrorista contra Estados Unidos. Dice que en estos momentos están tratando de llegar a una conclusión, de estudiar los datos que tienen y que es demasiado pronto para asignar una responsabilidad, pero sin duda habrá una dramática y fuerte respuesta de Estados Unidos, aunque aún no se ha determinado quién ha sido el culpable y quién va a tener que pagar por esto, como ha dicho el presidente Bush, que está, si no muy cerca, ya cerca de Washington, Quería aclarar que desde luego Air Force One, el avión bautizado así del presidente Bush, el que lo acompaña por todo el mundo, es la oficina ejecutiva de Estados Unidos. El presidente Bush es el que está en control. Esto que esté volando en Air Force One no quiere decir que no esté en control de la situación. Él es también el comandante en jefe de Estados Unidos y desde el Air Force One él puede tomar todas las decisiones necesarias. En cuanto a asignar responsabilidades, corresponderá a un esfuerzo entre el Pentágono, irónicamente uno de los blancos de este ataque, la CIA y el FBI, desde luego que ya están trabajando en esto y están aquí haciéndolo. Quería también destacar que la Casa Blanca y el Pentágono, ambos edificios, ambas estructuras tienen lo que llamamos, que en español también se llama bunkers, refugios subterráneos desde donde pueden actuar en una situación de emergencia. Nuevamente, entre los evacuados del Capitolio están muchos senadores y congresistas y tenemos reacciones de algunos de ellos. El senador Chuck Hagel, republicano de Nebraska, dijo que
a high rate of, coming on in, high rate of speed, and slams right with pinpoint accuracy right into the side of the building.
Bob, stay right there. We've got to go right now to Eddie Hayes. Eddie, are you with me?
I am, Nancy.
Eddie, what can you tell me right now? Pandemonium still out in the streets. Everyone turned, looking now to an empty skyline where the Trade Centers once stood.
Nancy, when I got out of the subway this morning, it was just a couple of minutes after the first airplane hit one of the World Trade Center towers, and I was standing in the street perhaps 10 blocks from the World Trade Center when the second airplane hit. You could see an enormous burst of flame. The buildings took fire immediately. You could see people jumping out of the buildings. It was obvious fairly early on, at least to my eyes, that there was a substantial risk that the building was going to collapse because the frame of the buildings appeared to be on fire and the buildings appeared to be eaten from the inside by the fire and the force of the impact. The terrible, terrible thing, Nancy, is the streets were absolutely full of heroic policemen and firefighters who were rushing to the scene to help and do whatever they could when the first building collapsed. And I am sure that when the second building collapsed, it even increased the casualties. One problem is that because this is a very, very densely populated area, there's a very large amount of street traffic. Both the World Trade Center buildings are made largely of glass, the exterior. The casualties from blowing glass must be enormous. It's by far the biggest buildings in the area. They're surrounded by a large area where there's a lot of pedestrian traffic. So I would think that the casualties today must be in thousands and thousands of people. It was a horrible thing. And the thing that struck me the most, Nancy, was to see these very, very brave men running, literally running in many cases, to do what they could at this building, rushing in their cars, crowded into cars and police vehicles to get down there to help, and know that just as they were arriving, that the building collapsed on top of them.
Eddie, it's Ricky upstairs with Nancy, and one of the things that Mayor Giuliani has now announced is he has said that he wants people to stay in unless they are ready to help with the rescue effort. Certainly it's on my mind that people in New York as well as Washington, but I'm speaking here in New York, that if you're someone who's a blood donor, that you ought to be going out, you ought to be giving blood. If you can help with the rescue effort and you understand that those are, again, heroic means are necessary. But Eddie, I say to you, we don't know if this is over, so yet we could have another catastrophe if tens of thousands of people go down to help in the World Trade Center area, and we don't know if something else is going to blow.
It also seems to me that there are lots of other options that could be problems. For instance, they have to know that our reaction to this is going to be very aggressive. It seems to me that they have to be planning, the individuals behind this have to be planning more strikes. And furthermore, you don't know what other devices they are planning to use. They don't know. You don't know. It seemed to me that one possibility was that they delayed the second crash, the second suicide strike on the building, so that they could maximize the damage, because you would have 10 to 20 minutes between the first and the second strikes, you have more people in the street, people trying to escape. When the second explosion comes, it would increase the damage. You don't know if there would be attacks planned for large commuted areas, and I would think that people should, as much as possible, be careful, not travel if they had to, and if they can donate blood, I understand there's a blood shortage, and they should do that.
Eddie Hayes, stay right there. We are now going to Tom Weber, joining us here at Court TV, an eyewitness of the attack this morning. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you.
Tom, take me back to this morning. What happened?
About 8:30 this morning, my bedroom window looks out onto the financial district and to the World Trade Center. I have a piano that I sometimes practice before I leave for my office, and at about 8:30 I was sitting at the piano and I heard a very loud winding sound that's very familiar to anyone who's ever taken an airplane anywhere. You hear it all the time at an airport, but it sounded much too close, which got my attention. I looked to my right and I saw a very large aircraft, a commercial aircraft, which looked like it was banking slightly east, fly directly into the World Trade Center, and it looked like it went right through it because there was an explosion at the front end of the building and then an explosion at the back end. I'm not really sure what that was, but it did appear as if the plane had flown directly through the tower.
And then what next?
Well, of course, I was in a state of shock. I mean, I knew I had seen something that I would never forget, and that would change a lot of lives, and I contemplated the horrific implications of this, what is now, as we learn, a deliberate act. I didn't know it at the time. I could only imagine what the families and these victims are going to go through and how this is going to have implications forever.
Tom, what did you see following the initial attack by the first plane?
Well, I called to my wife. I screamed, "Oh my God! A plane has flown through the World Trade Center." So when she came in, I saw another plane in close proximity to the tower, but I never, in my wildest imagination, thought that another plane would fly into the other tower. So I sort of just it didn't register to me right away. And then I saw a second explosion, which I think took place a little lower on the other tower, I believe.
Well, you're actually right, Tom. We're showing that video to our viewers right now. And the plane did crash into the second tower, many stories lower. Go ahead.
At that point, our windows and buildings shook again, and we decided that it would be in our best interest to get out of there. I mean, we were both in a state of shock. We were both panicking a little bit, and your imagination starts to run wild with you, and we did the prudent thing and we left.
When you left, was there pandemonium in the streets, Tom?
There was pandemonium, but I must say the police did a fabulous job, and the people, although there were mobs of people around looking and wondering as to what happened and speculating about what happened, they were extremely cooperative. They were allowing cars to go through, intersections weren't blocked. Although it should have been a massive mob scene and chaos, it really wasn't, and that's a testament to the New Yorkers that were on that scene today. They really were very cooperative with the police, and there were no incidents that I saw, and we were on the street for quite some time.
Tom, it's Ricky Kleeman. I wanted to ask you about what time you were able to leave downtown Manhattan today.
I guess we left at around 9:30.
Okay, so you were actually out of that scene at the time that these collapses occur.
Thank God, yes.
Thank God is exactly right. Now, do you have any idea at this point about when you'll be able to go back to your home, to be able to see if everything is okay, if your loved ones are okay?
I have no idea, really. The phone lines seemed to be opening up a little bit. It was impossible to get any calls through, whether it would be a cell phone or a landline. Earlier in the day, we've gotten a couple of calls through. I've contacted my mother, who was worried about us. She knows that we're safe. I have no idea when we return to Tribeca what the situation's going to be. We have a car. I don't know how we're going to get around, if we're going to be able to get around at all.
Right. Tom Weber, eyewitness this morning, now evacuated from the area of the World Trade Center. Stay with me. Tom, joining us by phone, Dan Montchek. He evacuated this morning from the World Trade Center. Dan, are you with me?
Yeah, I'm here.
First of all, thank you for being with us.
Fine.
And if you could tell us what happened this morning inside the trade tower.
Okay, if you want to cut me off as I ramble, that's fine. You know,
oh, no.
I'm not 100%.
You know, sitting at work, 9 o'clock, I guess, give or take the minute or two.
You were there early.
Huh?
You were there early this morning.
Oh, no, that's my job. You know, I'm usually like, it's like an 8 o'clock to 5 o'clock sort of setup.
Yeah.
That's what we do. That's what we do. And, you know, waiting to commence the day's business, and then you felt a shake, you know, a violent collision-like sensation that drove you right out of your seat. A lot of us were knocked to the ground. You looked out the window. You saw things just falling from the sky. It was. I had been in the 93 explosion, and I was on the 105th floor at the time of that attack, I guess. And this was radically different. This offered very little comfort. I thought that maybe if something like that happened again, I'd be prepped, and it was drastically different, much more violent, as you can see.
Dan, Nancy and I are both going to ask the same question. It's Ricky Kleeman. What floor were you on today?
I was on the 26th floor.
And are you in the tower that was where the first plane crashed or the second plane crashed?
One World Trade was the first impact, yes.
And so once you realize that something terribly bad is happening here, what do you do?
Well, we all got up. You know, I mean, I felt like I had some degree of I don't know, like experience at this. So,
Dan, stay right there. I've just been handed a bulletin summarizing a total of 5 plane crashes, the 2 Twin Tower crashes, 1 at the Pentagon, of course you've heard about that, 1 in Pittsburgh, and 1 at an as of yet unknown site. A total of 5 plane crashes so far this morning. Dan, I'm back with you. Ricky and I are back with you.
Very good.
So you lived through the 93 explosion. Incredible, Ricky. And now back for the 2001 attack. Look out the window, things falling from the sky, knocked out of your seat. What did you do next?
Oh, the next thing we just proceeded, you know, in a fairly orderly fashion.
That sounds pretty calm to me. That sounds pretty calm after a plane has just crashed into a building and everybody remained orderly.
Well, you know, give or take, it was fairly orderly because you know that there's a. I remember from the '93 explosion in particular, the shocking. You know, it was shocking that people actually descended, in my experience, 105 floors without incident. There was an example in that explosion where some guy way below me, I can't remember what floor we were on, had an asthma attack, and then somebody needed a dilator, and someone from way above me passed down a dilator, and then it passed right back up. I mean, people responded very well, and this was similar, although it was a much more violent experience. You know what I mean? The impact was clearly more violent than the last one. I think under the circumstances, people still conducted themselves in a very orderly fashion.
How do you get out of the building, Dan?
We went down, there's a spiral staircase that kind of takes you down, kind of connects my company's 2 floors that we occupy there. And it seemed to open up right onto a what do you call it, a fire escape. So, we descended via that fire escape, which, in contrast to the last experience, I think the Port Authority really did the homework on this, for better or worse. And they, there was no one coming in on lower floors. Once you got past 24, people descended in a very orderly fashion. There were, what I could tell, there were guys with radios, so I'd imagine they were Port Authority employees that were, they stayed to do their jobs. I mean, God bless them. They got us all out, and like I said.
And so when they get you all out, do they get you on the ground? Do you actually see that second plane go into the second building?
I had evacuated via the Marriott Hotel, and I guess they ushered us out that way with the stuff falling down from above, and we got across the street, my group, and you heard the roar of a jet engine, and then you got to the corner of your eye, you saw the thing zoom into the middle of this 2 World Trade. I mean, we physically saw that happen.
Dan, question. You initially, after the first crash, began going down the stairs. You were in the 20s on your floor.
Right.
Everybody started leaving. Is it your opinion, you were there, that many of the people left before the buildings crumbled?
If you were having gone through it before, and I know that the Port Authority cleaned up their act in terms of evacuation, in terms of informing people and security and all that, if you were above, like, pretty much the fire line, I estimated at like 70 floors. If you didn't get out within an hour, and I don't think you can get out within an hour from those levels, I don't think you got out. And I have a great many of former colleagues that work up at Cantor Fitzgerald up on the 5th floor. That's where I evacuated from last time. And
Dan, when you got to the ground and your group of people that you're with actually see this plane go into the second tower, what are you thinking?
Oh, it's horror. It's horror. It's like, having worked in that building, on and off for 15 years, I've seen planes and helicopters come fairly close by, but never that close. Never where there's ever an impact in sight, never where you say, oh, wow, look at that, that was pretty close. You see them, but, you're also 105 floors up. You're going to see things like this. This impact definitely felt like a terrorist attack. No question in my mind about it. There was no question in any of our minds about it. As we descended, when you got back out and you saw the second crash, you're thinking you're okay prior to the second crash. The second crash comes. Now you feel like you're under attack. It feels like a military operation. You don't know if it's terrorist. You don't know. I mean, I couldn't tell it was an American Airlines thing crashing in. There was a gray plane. I have no idea what, whatever, perpetrator of this, what they're flying, and whether they hijack an F-6. I don't know. I have no idea. So you now feel like you're in the midst of a military operation.
Yeah, Dan, were there one of the things that I was concerned about was when the buildings collapsed that the streets around the World Trade Center were very crowded and that they were full of rescue workers. Were you able to see what the condition of the streets around the World Trade Center were?
No, I was fortunate enough to be evacuated towards the Hoboken ferry, and I was on a train by the time they crashed.
As you were leaving the building, were there many rescue workers coming towards the building?
It hadn't commenced in full force. Like just to harken back to '93 again, I remember that the area being completely inundated with rescue vehicles, and that was not the case at this point.
At that time?
Right.
Okay.
You stated in '93 you were on the 105th floor,
yes.
Dan, and I'm just still wondering about the victims inside the World Trade Center following the first crash. If they were able to evacuate before that building crumbled, it wasn't that terribly long before the building went down, at least within an hour.
Right.
So when you were up on 105, how long did it take you to get out?
It was a 2.5-hour evacuation. It was 2.5 hours, but the caution you want to use when you report this scenario is that the Port Authority did have things in place to expedite an evacuation. I don't know what went on this time. I also know it's a long climb from down there, and it's a physically demanding climb downward. So to think that it was done inside an hour, I'd be very surprised. I'm sure it could be done inside 2.5, given the precautions they've taken. But you still have to negotiate 105 floors of stairs, plus various alleyways. Because I don't think they. If I remember my descent correctly, it wasn't a direct way down. It was you went down and then you went across and you went down again and then you went around a corner.
Right. Don. Dan Monchak, thank you so much for being with us.
Sure.
And miraculous, having survived the 1993 explosion on the 105th floor and now surviving another attack on the World Trade Center. That is Dan Monchak with us by telephone. Ricky, this morning, United Flight 93, a Boeing 757, left Newark 8:01 a.m., headed for San Francisco, 38 passengers. Second plane, Boeing 767, left 7:58 a.m. So synchronized, these attacks.
Major organization, major planning, not weeks, probably months. Not only planning in terms of synchronization, but planning, it seems to me from listening to our aviation expert, that you're dealing with a situation where you had to have people who could not only hijack the plane simultaneously, but probably people who knew how to fly them. Because I do agree with Mr. Tur that an American pilot would not have driven that plane with a gun to his head or not, or her head, into the World Trade Center. I think somebody took those controls.
And this morning, amidst all the speculation as to who, what, where, why, an eyewitness to this tragedy, Tom Weber, is joining us live. Tom, we now have heard of 5 plane crashes in a total across the country this morning. You observed what took place in the city. For our viewers just joining us, could you recap that?
Yes, at about 8:30 this morning, I was looking out my window in my bedroom, which looks down onto the financial district of Manhattan, and right at the World Trade Center. It used to be an absolutely breathtaking view, one that we would marvel at every day. I heard the winding of jet engines, very, very loud, much louder than the normal plane traffic that is overhead. I looked to my right and I saw a plane that, a large commercial airliner that looked to be banking a bit to the east. It was on top of the tower in an instant, and it looked to have gone right through the tower. There was an explosion through both sides of the tower. And a few minutes later, a few seconds later, a second aircraft that I thought was flying close to the other tower, but never gave it any credence because I could never imagine a second plane flying into the other tower, struck the tower a little lower from the, I guess from this, a southerly direction coming north.
Right.
And causing this massive tragedy and catastrophe.
Thankful this morning that you are with us, Tom Weber, you and your wife having safely evacuated the area. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
So with me here in the studio, Ricky Kleeman, in the News Center, Eddie Hayes. Eddie, as of right now, we have word, a Boston to LA flight, 92 people, crash. Washington, LA, 64 people, crash. Newark, San Francisco, 45 people, crash. Boston, LA, we don't know the location yet. 65 people crashed. That was a United Boeing 767 flight, flight 175. It's sifting in that the Trade Center attack, Eddie, was literally the tip of the iceberg this morning.
It's the degree of planning that went into this, Nancy, is very, very complicated. It was to get, frankly, you know, as big as the World Trade Centers are, to get two pilots and both of them to make dead strikes on them, to get them like that under these circumstances, takes some flying ability. And if you were there, as I was there and saw the second plane hit, it's almost as if they were aiming to do as much damage to a corner in the hope of taking the building down. And when you first saw these buildings catch fire from the inside, my thought was, you know, this building is going to come down, and everybody in the street was saying, oh, that's impossible, it's impossible. And in fact, not just one building went down, but both buildings. And really, since Pearl Harbor, I can't imagine anything that has been a strike on the American mainland with as much violence as this and as much damage as this.
Well, and Eddie, it certainly echoes the words of Franklin Delano Roosevelt when you think of this as a day of infamy, when you can look at now the year 2001 and going back 60 years to 1941. And Eddie, I say when you look at what's happening in Washington, the crash dealing with the Pentagon, now of course all of the Washington buildings being evacuated, the government buildings, that we really don't know if it's over in this city in Washington or in any other city. And I know you're someone who looks at the big world picture. Do you think this is the beginning, or you think this is the end?
It's a declaration of war. This is not an attack. This is, in effect, somebody who has the capability of doing extremely sophisticated, very damaging, extremely violent attacks. They have to know that there were reprisals. They have to know that the men that sent them out to die, to commit these suicide attacks, are going to be targeted for death, and that they have to be willing and have planned already because of the capacity they've shown over the last 4 hours to do that kind of planning. They have to have other things ready to go because they know that they don't have much longer to live themselves. So if they're absolutely committed to their cause, you would assume that they've made plans to respond to our response to their attacks, and you would have to assume that there are going to be other attacks in this country and perhaps around the world.
And of course, these attacks generating from some of the largest and busiest airports in this country, if it is an outside attack, which many people are opining it is, using our own commercial airlines against us. Those flights, again, Eddie, Boston, Washington, Newark, and Boston. As of yet, the unconfirmed location of that fifth crash, but we have confirmed another 65 people on board.
You know, it's a miracle, actually. I was thinking, Eddie and Nancy, when you look at the numbers of people on board these planes, it's really a miracle that there weren't more people on board these planes. These are big planes.
Right.
And I mean, I think that my initial thought hearing about the first flight from Boston, when you're dealing with a 757, especially going to LA, that's a big, busy flight, and it's somewhat remarkable. And yet, when we start to total these numbers, the numbers downtown at the World Trade Center, I predict, are going to be astronomical.
You know, the other thing is that the other question is this: how do you run an economy if you can't say to the people that go into the financial center, go back to work tomorrow, go back to work next week, you're going to be safe?
Joining us right now from our Studio B, Eric Erickson. He observed this morning a low-flying plane. Eric, are you with me?
Yes, I am.
Eric, welcome to Court TV on a morning that will certainly be remembered by all. Could you tell our viewers what you observed this morning?
Yeah, my apartment is on between Park and Madison on 37th Street, and it's facing south. And this morning I was a little late, and I was pulling up my blind, and then I saw this plane, commercial plane. I thought it was a 737. I fly all the time between Washington and New York on the shuttle, so I'm familiar with those kind of planes. And I was very amazed with the flight pattern, because it was coming extremely low, and I was pretty sure it was going to crash. And I also saw that it had some smoke coming out on the tail, and my apartment was the windows were closed, and the air condition was on, so I couldn't hear any impact. But first of all, I was absolutely sure that the plane was crashing. I thought it was someone who had lost, a commercial plane that had problems. And just a few seconds later, I saw smoke, and then I realized that it had crashed.
And of course, Erica, you are mirroring what Ricky and I discussed earlier. At the very beginning, no one could really believe when it was first broadcast that a plane had actually flown into the Trade Center, and then within minutes, no one could believe. They thought it was a trick on the eyesight, a second plane crashing in.
When you saw it, Mr. Erickson, you must have assumed, obviously, that this was an accident, something was going wrong with this plane, and I would think all of your belief systems would tell you that you couldn't possibly conceive of the first plane being a deliberate attempt to go into that building.
No, absolutely. I was convinced that this was an accident. I hate to say a normal accident, but it was caused by whatever. And so I went actually out afterwards, and I had to go to pick up some tickets, airline tickets as it were, at the Delta ticket office on 42nd and Park Avenue. And that's when I entered there, and that's when I learned that the second plane had actually hit the other tower. And of course, in that very moment, you're absolutely sure that this cannot be a coincidence like that. It must be something else.
This morning, we are receiving bulletins of 5 crashes in total across America. 1 Boston to LA flight, Washington to LA, Newark to San Francisco, and Boston to LA. The location of the final crash, the 5th crash, is as of yet unreported. A total of 5 crashes. Joining me now by phone, James Demetrio, an eyewitness to what took place. James, are you with me?
Yes, I am.
James, could you tell our viewers, you were there this morning, you saw what took place. What did you see?
I work right across the street in One World Financial Center.
Correct.
On the 35th floor. I was at my desk. It was approximately 5 to 9, I believe, and that's when this occurred. We heard a crash. I look outside. The sky is clear, so we knew it wasn't thunder and lightning. And we literally see debris coming down. And as soon as we see the debris coming down, my sales manager comes out of his office imploring us to leave the building. He had a corner office, all glass, so he had a direct view of the World Trade Center, because the side of the floor that we were on was a direct view of the World Trade Centers. So we started evacuating the building, going down the stairwells, taking a long time because, of course, I'm on the 35th floor. What happened then is it was taking a while, as I said, and we went into another floor. The door was open to the stairwell. I saw a number of my colleagues going into another office area, which was a different floor. We looked up, went to the window, and saw the building on fire. At that moment, the workers were on the phones, and they had found out that a plane crashed into the building.
You obviously saw much of what took place this morning, James. Is it true that inhabitants, office workers, were literally leaping from the building?
At that point in time, exactly. At that point in time, our security told us to stay in the building because of the falling debris. So we stayed in. And as we were watching, just the fire and everything going on, we then noticed immediately people jumping out of the buildings. And it had to be one of the worst things I've ever seen.
How did those windows get open? I always thought that buildings like the World Trade Center, that you wouldn't be allowed to open those windows from the inside.
I would imagine it would have been from the blast.
Oh, so that they were,
or they were taking chairs to it or anything just to break the windows.
Question, how far up were from where they were leaping?
Well, at that point in time, we were watching the first tower go up. It was the first plane crash at that point in time. When the second one occurred, that's when I literally ran out the door. So in the first tower, I believe it hit the 86th floor.
No, I'm referring to the people you witnessed. Were they terribly high up? Were they above or below?
We were watching the first tower at that point in time burn.
Yeah.
So the first tower, I mean, how high was the fire at 86th floor? So they were jumping from around the 80th floor.
Oh, my God.
God.
Yeah, definitely.
How many people did you see jump?
I saw myself about 4 or 5, and I couldn't watch anymore. I turned around, got away from the windows, and at that point in time, we heard the second plane hit the second tower. That's when we got out of the building.
James, when you did get out of the building, tell us about what kind of help you got from the police and emergency services.
The mindset of these people who were at
location. Supplies to areas that are difficult to reach, as well as providing just for stability and orders.
Collapsing in on.
In America.
That I think is.
Now.
Everybody.
We will find out who is carried out.
Any particular problem with that?
At the root of this, what
even the engine.
Planes.
He gave me no time.
There will be a number of horrible stories. We have already heard many of them.
We'll have a lot of other things on there.
Washington.
This all started at about 7:50 Chicago time. That was the initial plane into the World Trade Center. The Pentagon happening about 9:30, 8:30 Chicago time, I should say.
And then in Pittsburgh.
We also haven't heard anything recently about this plane that we were told had been hijacked and was in the air somewhere. And that was the one from Boston to San Francisco, I believe, or somewhere out east. So we calculated they had about at least 6 or 8 hours worth of flying time in terms of fuel. And the implications we were getting were that they were in contact and trying to do something there.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that that may have been this flight, right?
I think it was. I think we actually got later confirmation that it had in fact crashed, but they did not say where. But there were mentions at some point of 2 in the air. Given that these planes are landing everywhere that they can, first available opportunity, I think there's going to be an awful lot of confusion. And you know, people should be aware that they probably won't be able to hear from or get in contact with their relatives flying today, but that isn't necessarily a sign for concern. They could be anywhere from Canada to anywhere in the continental U.S.
Now, hold your stomach. We have just scary shots from New York. These are shots from the ground that we haven't seen yet. If we could roll that tape. Most of what we've been seeing was provided from, you know, just helicopters and different vantage points. We couldn't get any live signals because they need the antennas on top of the World Trade Center towers to accomplish that. So this was videotape that was filmed and then, or taped, and now we're replaying it for you. It looks like
this was
may have been
an
after
hour
the
or
second
so,
collapse.
after the plane hit it, when the building burned and then collapsed. And we saw earlier 2 people hanging out of windows trying to get out. I mean, the power's out. The fire officials can't get up to that floor.
I mean, look at the overwhelming amount of smoke. Well, a lot of this is dust and debris, but earlier, just this thick black smoke, people hanging from the windows, people that they were never able to reach.
No, these are rescuers running for their lives, trying to get out of there, because if it hasn't, it's one of them collapsed and then the other one collapsed, and we haven't seen a hard number in terms of how much of the ground area or what kind of footprint this made after it did collapse. I'm getting an urgent from the Pentagon. Washington TV station reports there are dead people inside the Pentagon. Plane crashed.
Reporting that all flights within the
Right, obviously, Anton.
Many people are thought to have been trapped. About 50,000 people work at the trade center.
You can barely on their cell phones. They're trying to get in touch with family and with friends and with their corporate offices just to tell them where they are and where they
The fate of those people unknown, but one has to believe that many, if not all of them, are dead. Chris Yates of Jane's Transport of London said this is perhaps the most audacious terrorist attack that's ever taken place in the world. Another quote from him: "It takes the logistics operation from the terrorist groups involved that is second to none," unquote. Now, Mr. Yates speaks of terrorist groups. There are those in diplomatic and intelligence circles who would believe that this kind of attack perhaps could not be coordinated and carried out on this scale without the help of some state governments, actual state governments. But that is, of course, speculation on their part. Nobody knows who brought this terror, this death and destruction, this horror to the United States. President Bush has ordered a full-scale investigation. By the way, we're told that the president will be speaking on videotape from a videotape made at Barksdale Air Force Base outside Shreveport, Louisiana. This is an unexplained situation, but understandably, the government doesn't want to explain everything they're doing and all the whereabouts of the president. The president was known to be in Florida earlier in the day.
New York City and also in Washington.
We also
back to you.
All right, Molly. Our White House correspondent John Roberts is in Washington. John?
And was because, frankly, it
close. I know that we have already seen 26, and we currently are receiving patients at this time.
A Navy Public Affairs spokesperson has confirmed, or apparently told a local station in Washington, that people have lost their lives inside the Pentagon. And you expect how many more patients, Catherine?
We're expecting patients. We don't know how many. We are just taking them at this time.
All right. Catherine Hughes at Virginia Hospital Center, formerly known as Arlington Hospital. Catherine, thanks so much for talking with us. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Just to recap where the president was when this occurred, just before 9 o'clock this morning, he was taking part in an education event near Longboat Key, Florida. He was actually, we understand, reading to students down there when he first got word of the first plane crashing into the World Trade Center, and then he was given word that a second plane had crashed into the other tower. He did have a chance to make some comments before heading out of Florida, and here's a sample of what he had to say.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a difficult moment for America. I unfortunately will be going back to Washington after my remarks. Secretary Rod Pace and Lieutenant Governor will take the podium and discuss education. I do want to thank the folks here at Booker Elementary School for their hospitality. Today we've had a national tragedy. 2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country. I have spoken to the Vice President, to the Governor of New York, to the Director of the FBI, and have ordered that the full resources of the federal government go to help the victims and their families, and to conduct a full-scale investigation to hunt down and to find those folks who committed this act. Terrorism against our nation will not stand. And now, if you join me in a moment of silence.
I want to mention that President Bush is said to have made a couple of other comments. He said that freedom itself was attacked, freedom will be protected, and that the U.S. will hunt down and punish those responsible. Just to, go ahead.
He also said that the U.S. military was on high alert at home and abroad.
Just to update you on the situation, we told you that there had been several international flights en route to the United States. The original plan from the FAA was to divert those to Canada. We now understand that they will be allowed to land in the U.S. The FAA is not saying why they're not going forward with their original plans to divert to Canada, and we don't have any information on the points of origin or the destinations of those 22 planes. NBC's Campbell Brown is standing by in Washington. Campbell?
Well, Matt, what we can tell you is that we do know the president now is at the Barksdale Air Force Base. That's in Shreveport, Louisiana, northern Louisiana. He flew there from Florida, where he was this morning. And it was interesting because in those early minutes, shortly after Air Force One took off from Florida, no one was told within the White House press corps where the president was, where he was going. Our information now is coming from what we call the travel pool. It is one network reporter who is on board the plane with the president. He did make a brief statement. We're waiting to get more on what he said when they landed at Barksdale Air Force Base. We're not sure whether or not he's going to stay there or that they will take the president somewhere else. There are a number of options. Obviously, there's a bunker in Colorado Springs that the military runs. There is the so-called Doomsday plane, which is another option. This is an aircraft that is far more sophisticated than Air Force One. It has the most advanced electronic equipment on board where the president could communicate with anyone from that plane. It can stay in the air. It can be refueled in the air. So it is something that was designed and built in the event that there was a nuclear attack, but it is a possible option today if they feel like they need that. Of course, the president, when he was in Florida and initially made those remarks you played a moment ago, he did say he was coming back from Washington, but obviously now they're reevaluating the situation to try to figure out where it may be best for him to operate from. There are a few officials still at the White House now. His National Security Advisor, Condoleezza Rice, and other key officials are in the White House. We're told they're operating out of the Situation Room, and that a few areas of the White House have been designated as so-called hard rooms, meaning Special Secret Service agents are there guarding the few key people who are needed to stay at the White House. The rest of the White House has been evacuated. But the president is obviously in close contact with his national security team, who is remaining there for the time being. He was informed of this while he was in Florida at an education event this morning of the first incident when the first plane flew into the World Trade Center. He was told by phone by his national security advisor, Condoleezza Rice, while he was in a holding room, while he was about to go out and speak to some elementary school children. Then while he was actually reading to these students, a note was passed him from his chief of staff, Andy Card. In the pictures you can see the reaction on the president's face, as shocked as the rest of us at what had happened. And his plans immediately changed, initially to come back to Washington, but now, again, the Barksdale Air Force Base in Shreveport, Louisiana, and we'll be waiting further word on where he will go from here and where he will sort of command the military operations, given the situation. Matt?
All right, Campbell, thank you very much. Katie?
Meanwhile, Matt, Cardinal Egan of the New York Archdiocese is joining us now. He has been outside St. Vincent's Hospital here in Manhattan delivering last rites to some of the people who have been brought to that hospital. Your Eminence, thank you for talking with us. Can you tell us or describe the scene for us if you could?
Well, I've been here since the very beginning. We have 184 patients here at St. Vincent's Hospital in Lower Manhattan. 10 are critical, and 6 are of the police department or the fire department. So far, 2 have passed away. The situation has been that the doctors and the nurses are waiting outside here. The hospital is completely mobilized, and we believe that we will be able to handle whomever they send. We understand that Bellevue Hospital and St. Vincent's Hospital are the 2 places where they'll be sending the most critically injured, and that they do have triage down closer to the 2 centers. I have to say this, that I've taken care of a lot of people spiritually, anointed a lot of people, and I've no limit to my admiration for what I've seen of the doctors, the nurses, and the staff and the administration of St. Vincent's Hospital. And I'm told that that is what is to be found throughout this great city of New York. We're addressing this the way New Yorkers address things, with a prayer and with a total commitment to help everyone who is hurting, and especially to make it clear to families and others that we will be doing the very best we can for their loved ones. Well, I have here Dr. Ackerman, if you'd like to speak to him.
Sure, that would be great.
Here he is right now.
Dr. Ackerman, are you an emergency physician there? Dr. Ackerman, it's Katie Couric. Thank you for talking with us.
Thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about the situation there and how the patients are doing? I know that you have about 184 patients, is that correct?
That's correct, Katie, and actually the number is growing as the minutes go on. When the first ambulances came in, there were 10 or 11 people in each of them. Now that the triage centers are set up downtown, we're getting fewer patients at the moment, but we're getting the most critically injured. Severe burns, several heart attacks, multiple traumas, many broken bones, and probably what's most striking is that everyone that's coming is coming full of gray powder from the massive explosions that obviously took place. There are family centers set up here at the medical center. There's a special number that family members can call to try to find out if their loved one is here at St. Vincent's. That's area code 212-604-7285. And the New York City Police Department's working very closely with us. We're very grateful that His Eminence has been here to help us and our staff, and we continue to be prepared. I was here for the last major incident with the World Trade Center, and this, in my opinion, is many, many times worse.
Well, Dr. Ackerman, do you have enough people on staff to take care of the hundreds of people who are there already and the other people who may be arriving at your hospital?
We are very well staffed right now, Katie. We are a little bit concerned, though, about later in the day. People will obviously wear down the number of traumas that